for joining us today. My name is Chanry Gould, and I'm the project manager for the Stone Oak Area Regional Center. Next slide, please. And next slide. And with me, we have several folks from MIG. We have Kristen Ramirez, which you've seen before. She's our project manager on the MIG side and helps us coordinate with our consultants. Ellie Schaefer, she's also with MIG. She's our land use subject matter expert. And Saul also was with us during the last meeting. He's here to also help us continue documenting input that we receive throughout the duration of this meeting. And Krissa Cox is the principal planner with Mosaic, and her specialty is also land use. I'm going to just pan through here because I see some new faces. And as I call you out, if you could just unmute and introduce yourself to the planning team. Andrew?
Hey, I'm Andrew Samples. I work with a group called Moran Capital. We purchased the Lubies at the northeast corner of 1604 in Blanco about 2 years ago. Excited to be on the call.
Thanks for joining us. I know you were with us participating at the last meeting. It's nice to put a face to a name.
And I'm not 21 years old.
Let's see, Minnie Sanchez.
Hi, I'm Minnie Alvarego Sanchez, and I'm also not 21 years old. But however, I am a resident of Emerald Forest, which is right at Bulverde and 1604. It's the last neighborhood in Stone Oak. Retired educator and consultant with Andrade Vanderpeet. Thank you.
Thank you, Minnie. I'm glad you were able to join us today. Art Downey.
Yeah, I'm Art Downey on the Stone Oak Property Owners Association Board of Directors. I also am on my neighborhood Stone Mountain board. Unfortunately, I've missed a couple of your meetings because I've been ill in the hospital for a couple of weeks and then rehab for a couple of weeks, but I'm home now and hoping to catch up.
Thank you, Art, and we'll be sure to fill you in for any of the previous discussions that that you have missed, but we'll get you caught up. We can't see you, but Robert Schlort.
Hey, I can turn my camera back on. I was just positioning things. Yeah, I made the first meeting. I just missed the last meeting. So I'm with the Stubing family, who owns a few of the remaining properties in Stone Oak around Heavener, Hardy Oak, and then the quarry. And that's why I was invited to participate. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Robert. And we have additional planning team members here that have been with us for a couple of the other meetings. Thank you for being able to join us again today. Jeff, Richard King with JVSA, and let's see, I want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. I think that covers, oh, and Joe, good seeing you again. All right, with that, if we could just go to the next slide, please. We'll just give a quick recap of the objectives for today's meeting. So during the last meeting, we had talked about the vision and goals for the area. So we'll, in the next couple screenshots or slides, we'll go over that with you some more. And then during the last planning team meeting, we had provided an overview of the analysis that Matt with EPS had done on the vacant and underutilized parcels. And so that generated conversation about focus areas. And so we have prepared an exhibit to capture the geographic areas that we had talked about during the last planning team meeting. So we'll present that to you today. We'll do a quick discussion on housing and job projections for the Stone Oak area. And then we'll get into land use and present to you the draft land use base map based on some additional analysis that Krissa had done from previously adopted plans, SA corridors, and a couple other documents. And then we'll go over the land use categories. That's what we had covered with the PDF that I had sent out to everyone. You'll see that there's those cards that talk about the different land use categories that were adopted by our city council in 2018. And then after that, we'll get into the focus areas land use activity, where we'll use those cards that we had distributed via email. Next slide, please. Next slide. So for some of you that were able to join us during the last planning team meeting, this was the draft vision that we had come up with. We haven't made any changes to it yet. I think for the most part, from the input that we received so far, everyone was pretty satisfied with this draft vision. Next slide, please. The next slide is the goals. And a lot of the comments that we received from the planning team was based on the goals. And Deb with NEISD had made a comment about wanting to see a goal specific to the input that we had received during the community meeting, and the survey results centered around increasing opportunity for education, continued education, and then also for jobs. So we're working on drafting that. And then also, I think it was Mr. Sillman had made a comment about wanting to also capture the importance of preservation and conservation of natural resources, particularly water, because this is an area that's within the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone. So as we gather more input from the larger community beyond just the planning team, we'll be refining the goals, and at the next planning team meeting, we'll present to you the revised goals, along with the vision too, if we need to revise that any further. Next slide, please. So during the last, next slide, please. So during the last planning team meeting, we had talked about what we mean by focus areas. So in essence, any focus areas within this plan area are areas of opportunity where we can direct future investment, support, or improvements. And that's not only directing future public investments, but also, as we identify these focus areas, potential for private investment as well. So based on the analysis, next slide, please. So based on the analysis that Matt Prosser with EPS had conducted, identifying the areas with underutilized parcels and then vacant parcels, we had talked about some very specific geographic areas, and 1 through 7, we had talked about during the last planning team meeting. And I'll explain to you some more about focus areas that we have on this exhibit called out as numbers 8 through 12. So for focus area that's labeled number 1, just to refresh your memory, this was the area where the larger parcels were, the property owners included Santikos, HEB, and then some other LLCs. So we talked with the planning team about this being a potential focus area based on anticipated future growth. The area identified as number 2, there was a large parcel or parcels that made up a large area owned by the San Antonio Housing Trust Public Facility Corporation and Bitter Blue, which is the developer, and also HEB. Focus area number 3, that's located just south of Stone Oak Parkway. That is where the VIA's station is located, and VIA had indicated that they had also acquired some property adjacent to that. So it also included a large parcel of land that's government owned. So we had a discussion about this potentially being an activity center or mobility hub because of the VIA Park and Ride station there. Number 4, that's south of Evans Road. There was a significant amount of vacant land adjacent to the shopping center there. That includes the Home Depot, Discount Tire, some other retail stores, along with a key U.S. Postal Service location that distributes to other USPS offices. So we identified that as another potential focus area. Number 5, that's an area, it's a little over 800 acres that's currently undeveloped. It's already it's zone master planned community zoning district. I think many people in the area refer to it as the Yates property. And again, it's entitled for single family and multifamily development. However, during our discussion at the last planning team meeting, we talked about how this area, because of the large acreage, perhaps we can consider other land uses that help it become an additional asset for the community. Around number 6 is around Mud Creek Park on both sides of Redland Road. There's some underutilized and vacant parcels. And because of its location next to a tributary that leads to Mud Creek Park, perhaps this is an area that we can integrate some green infrastructure concepts into this area as we consider future development. And then next to Class and Stubing Ranch Park, that's in the process of being developed, we recognize Martin Marietta, the quarry there, its continuing operations. This one's a little unique from the other focus areas because we recognize that the quarry is going to be there for a while. So while we talked about it as a focus area, I think it's important to note that it may not be truly a focus area during this planning cycle, but perhaps something that we acknowledge and recognize as a potential location for future consideration. And then the focus areas.
What number was that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Oh, sorry about that. Number 7. So
Okay.
that is the Martin Marietta quarry right next to Stubing Ranch Park. And then numbers 8 through 12, I wanted to bring those to your attention. We did not talk about those specifically at the last planning team meeting, but I wanted to identify those on the map, and then we can talk about it as we discuss in more detail focus areas, because I think based on the way the conversation happened at the last planning team meeting, we were presenting the underutilized and vacant parcels analysis. It steered the conversation into just us talking about the vacant and underutilized parcels and not looking at other potential focus area types. And so other focus area candidates, I should say. And so wanted to present this to the planning team, and we can talk about it later on when we talk about focus areas. But number 8 is Huebner Road. Huebner Road is identified on the city's master thoroughfare plan as a secondary arterial, and we recognize that it needs to be extended. It's ultimately on the master thoroughfare plan. It actually is ultimately supposed to connect to frontage road along 281. So knowing that we have Stubing Ranch Park being developed, and the surrounding uses are predominantly residential homes, perhaps this is an area, this segment of Huebner Road is perhaps an area that we want to evaluate to see how the road and adjacent uses wind up looking in terms of streetscape. Number 9, this is right off of Stone Oak Parkway and kind of the quadrant there that's shaped by Sonterra Place and Stone Oak Parkway, where they intersect. There's a commercial center there that includes Cornerstone Church, IHOP. There's a Homewood Suites by Hilton there, Torchy's Taco, and other retail and restaurant uses. It's somewhat of a busy area, but many times as you drive by there, it's a sea of parking lot. And so we thought maybe we could identify this as another potential focus area to see if we can look at other ways to maximize the potential here. And then number 10, this is where Community Bible Church is located. And they recently acquired a large parcel of land off East Sonterra Boulevard. And if you're familiar with this area, as you drive on East Sonterra Boulevard, you're approaching where Best Buy is located, Main Event. And then Sonterra Boulevard dead ends there. And just beyond that dead end, if you turn left into Community Bible Church, there's Emmett Park there as well. Based on the geographic location here, it's adjacent to a creek a creek that connects to Mud Creek Park located south of 1604. So we identified this as a potential focus area, just recognizing that Community Bible Church recently acquired the adjacent parcel. And as you drive along East Sonterra Boulevard, it's not too inviting as you drive to that commercial center, because you're driving, if you're taking Sonterra Boulevard, based on the way the development is, the buildings are facing frontage road there. And so it's not too inviting because there's dock doors there on the backside along Sonterra Boulevard, and then there aren't any windows or anything. So it has to do with kind of the treatment of the buildings as well. And then number 11 is the Northwood Shopping Center, which includes HEB, Bed Bath & Beyond, Academy, the movie theater there, and Red Robin. That's an area that there's some activity, but because of where it's located, it's not too pedestrian friendly. And again, it's another area where it's a lot of parking area that many times feels underutilized. And lastly, number 12, just on the other side of the intersection of 1604 and 281, it's where the car dealerships are with GMC there. And I'm drawing a blank on the other car dealership, but right off of frontage road of 1604 there's food establishments that include Pizza Hut, KFC, and a couple other fast food restaurants there. Multiple driveway cuts, one after another, off of frontage road. And then there's no cross lot access from one lot, from one establishment to another. And so it seemed like an area that perhaps we can revisit to look at ways where we could potentially minimize any risk of traffic collisions and stuff, because of the way it's designed right now with one driveway after another, multiple cuts. It's not too easy to get from one building to another. So that covers it for the focus areas. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Shannon, a quick question about
Yes.
number 12.
Yes.
Does that also include, really familiar with that area, does that also include St. Thomas, the Episcopal Church?
So based on the way we have it identified, I think St. Thomas Episcopal Church, and I'll run a search real quick. I'll take a look at that. It might just be west.
Right, just west of the line.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But there's definitely some strange traffic patterns in that area. So
yeah, and so that's why we thought we'd identify that, because even just past it was Toyota. That was the other car dealership. I couldn't remember. Just past the dealerships, there's it's not vacant, but it's definitely underutilized. And if that land were to ever be developed, because it's zoned for non-residential use, if it were to be developed into something else, their point of access would be off this unnamed street. It's like a private drive that cuts through between GMC and Toyota. And so it just seemed like an area that as you drive through there, it looks like we'll have to evaluate how future development beyond the car dealership could connect. And then also with the food establishments right off of frontage road there. And I'm speaking also from personal experience. I entered on the wrong driveway. I turned on the wrong driveway and I couldn't easily get from one location to another. So I figured if I was having a hard time getting from one building to another, I can't imagine how many other people were feeling that same frustration as I was. But thank you. So with that, we're going to get into the housing and jobs projections. Kristen, thank you.
Thank you, Tannery. And thank you for your comment, Jeff. If you have some more information about that focus areas, or if any of you have any more information that you want to provide, feel free to utilize the chat and we'll take your comments and copy them to the mural board. Saul and I will be working behind the scenes to capture your comments throughout the conversation and the presentation today, but especially during our activity a little bit later. So with that, I wanted to get started and really kind of give you an overview on our housing and job projections. So this is really just a primer leading into our land use conversation, just so you have that perspective as we start talking about preferable land use designations for the area, those that you are most comfortable with, those that you want to see more of within the plan area. So let's take a step back real quick and kind of revisit the intention of the regional center itself and what Stone Oak is designated as. So you can see on this map, we presented this during our first planning team meeting, but Stone Oak is really classified as an activity center. In comparison, you can think of there are three types of regional centers. Those are activity centers, logistic service centers, and then special purpose centers as well. So an activity center is really more oriented on higher concentrations of people and jobs and mixed use environments. And that's really what they're more envisioned as. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we have different stages of maturity in these types of activity centers and all regional centers. All regional centers altogether, but Stone Oak is still on that spectrum of being more emerging, as you can think of one that is already specialized and one that is completely mature is obviously our central business district. This is more downtown area. And so this is based on the amount of land utilization and then obviously the concentration of uses. So population and jobs per developed acre as well. So Stone Oak is still on that emerging end, obviously just given the growth of San Antonio going in that direction. And so on the next slide, you'll start to get an understanding of really within our regional centers areas as a whole, in all 13, including Stone Oak, there are 50% of the jobs within the city, or sorry, within the county are located within those regional centers. And so that also includes 50% of the more recent commercial industrial space that has been developed within the county. So really, again, think of those regional centers, the reason they're identified and Stone Oak is identified as the regional centers because they're areas that are starting to capture growth from the city, just given the amount of employment that exists, the amount of housing that exists within those areas to date, but then also what is projected to exist in the future and really looking at that 2040 spectrum. So looking at our growth for 2040 in terms of employment, the Stone Oak area is projected to have almost 34,000 new jobs added to the area, but between, I would say now, but it was really starting at 2010 to 2040. And so during that 30-year period. And so there's currently about almost 33,000 jobs within the area as of last year. So you obviously think of that as not doubling because it already started at the 2010 mark, but significantly growing by 2/3 what we have now. And so obviously to complement the jobs that are within the area, there is also that need to provide housing and to look at the existing housing. So on the next slide, you'll get an understanding of how many houses we have within this area, but also what is the projected growth and how many apartments have been added to the area, how many houses have been added to the area. And again, with looking at that 2040 spectrum, there is going to be about 16,500 new housing units, about 550 units added to the plan area within that 30-year timeframe, 2010 to 2040. And so our area is obviously different than many of the centers and the other plans that we're working on. It has a higher rate of homeownership and then really a lower proportion of renters, compared to elsewhere in the region in Bexar County. So there are about 64% of the housing units in terms of all types of housing units available are owner occupied, and there are about 36% that are renter occupied within the area. So I just wanted to give you that a little bit of primer, again, knowing that the annual housing growth rate for this area is significantly faster and more rapid than the rest of the city. Obviously, this is a thriving area. There is room to grow in certain cases, but then also there's just a lot of activity happening. This is why it's been noted as an activity center. And so we wanted to give you this primer and understanding of what is projected and how we can start to think about how we can accommodate those housing units and that employment growth as we're talking through our land use discussion today. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Carissa because we have a lot of good conversation and a lot of, she has a lot of knowledge to share with you on our land use topic.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. Most of you are probably going to be somewhat familiar with how land use planning works. We're going to take some time today to just get down to the basics of what we're trying to accomplish. There's no way in one virtual meeting we're going to be able to cover this entire area and get down to detailed land use allocations through the whole area. But we'd like to start just talking about San Antonio's land use categories in general and what this land use plan needs to do. So next slide, please. When we talk about land use, I'll be repeating certain things over and over again. And so I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but it is important. So when we just talk about land use, it is a very general term. We're talking about where people live, where people work, where things get manufactured, where our parks and open spaces are, and what some of the civic or government uses are in our areas. Every city has a different way of approaching land use. There's no two cities that are going to have it done the exact same way. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at San Antonio's environment. Incidentally, is there anyone on the call that has properties or interests in other cities and has been involved in something like this in the past? So I can know. We are going to be doing a little bit of interactive stuff, so this might be a good time to stop. Is everyone familiar with how to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom? Like if you go down to the bottom where it says reactions and you click on it, you can raise your little hand there. Okay, good job. Thanks, Jeff. I don't want to be talking at everybody. None of us do. So, but at the same time, we are virtual. So I want to keep this thing moving forward. But as Kristen said, we have the chat box. So if you want to open that, there's a little icon at the bottom of your screen where you can open your chat window. And so if you have any comments or questions while I'm talking, use that feature. And then if in that little reaction thing, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask a question or have a comment, we can keep moving forward. And if I don't hear you, you can do this. That always works as well. Okay, so we'll jump into it. Next slide, please. So land use has been around in our country for about 100 years. It started with zoning regulations about 100 years ago. And the intent behind land use and zoning is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our communities. Land use allows the city to manage growth in a way that is consistent with the preferences and the feedback that they get from the communities. So in its essence, land use is about public safety, it's about management of congestion, and it's about management of future growth. And so that's kind of why at the beginning of this, we went back and looked at focus areas and why Kristen gave you those statistics about housing and employment, because our land use plan needs to reflect community preferences, but it also needs to manage that growth that we anticipate for this area. So all of that growth has to go somewhere. And that is kind of what we're trying to accomplish with this land use plan. I know we've been working on this. COVID threw a wrench in everything. And so this planning endeavor started several years ago. So before we all kind of went on pause, an existing conditions atlas was created where existing land use was kind of discussed a little bit. We're going to be leaving that, and we're going to be talking in this presentation moving forward about future land use. So that is, what do the land use patterns in this area need to look like moving forward as new growth comes in, as new projects get started, new development, as redevelopment happens? What do we want the land use distributions to be like in this area? Next slide. And land use is not zoning. So I feel like, because I've done this for a while and I do development codes and I do plans, and the frustrating thing is nobody cares until the rezonings happen, which is a shame because this is the time when you can really get in and look at what the possibilities are for these properties. So land use and zoning are very different. We're not going to be talking about rezonings at all during this project that we're doing right now. That will come later if any of that happens. So we're looking at policies that are going to guide decisions related to future land use, future zoning and future development. So land use is about policies and parameters. The focus of our land use plan is on areas and on patterns and on relationships. Whereas when we're talking about zoning, we're talking about entitlements. We're talking about rights of use for individual properties. So as we're looking at the land use map, we're focusing on patterns and on areas and relationships, more than just zooming into single properties and, well, my land use of this property should be thus and so. It's more about relationships and areas and patterns and density and uses that we want to see throughout this regional center. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the land use plan is not going to change the zoning of any property. It does not restrict the existing rights of use on any property, and it doesn't cause any business to be, inhibited or any buildings have to be removed or changed. So existing rights of use continue no matter what the future land use plan says. But the future land use plan does define how a property can be rezoned in the future. And so San Antonio has created future land use categories that establish a menu of zoning options. So if the land use is purple, then there's going to be like 10 zoning districts that would apply within that land use category. And so it helps council and the commissions to make decisions about the suitability of rezonings in the future. And in that way, it serves as a guide for elected officials. And then it's, as I mentioned earlier, it is also a way to ensure that the projected growth can be absorbed in an orderly way. The land use plan also establishes preferred mixtures of uses and density patterns. And density is just the intensity of uses. It's like the difference between a single family home and an apartment building. They're both residential, but one is low density, meaning like one unit on the property, and the other is high density, meaning a lot of units on that same size property. So that is something that the land use plan is going to address. Again, dealing with patterns. Okay, next slide. Your council and your commissions will use this plan as a reference, as a guide. It's a guide in the decision-making process. A good land use plan also helps the development community because they can see where the city is going, where future public investment is likely to occur, and where their project fits within the overall vision for this area. And of course, staff and partner agencies also use land use plans so that we can coordinate growth management. The VIA station area is a perfect example at Stone Oak Parkway and 281. VIA, as a partner to the city, needs to coordinate its transportation and long-range transit planning with the land use planning of the city, again, to promote orderly growth. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, every city has its own kind of unique approach to land use and to zoning. And I believe it was 2018, City of San Antonio adopted their new land use categories. And this slide just shows you, this is not the Stone Oak area, this is south of town. This is another area where the plan has already been adopted. So we wanted you to see a final adopted plan, land use plan. So that's what's in the bottom left corner. In the middle is super tiny text. We know that, I apologize. But mostly the yellow box on the right is what I wanted to call your attention to. The categories establish uses, the character, the density, and zoning districts that are allowed. And so if the paragraph at the top describes the kind of stuff that you should see in a yellow area. So if the land use for that area is called low density residential, then this is the way that area should look. And then underneath that with the bullets, it tells you which zoning districts would be allowed in a yellow low density residential area. So if you are in a neighborhood that is yellow low density residential, and let's say you have a 40-acre site that's that way, and someone wants to develop it, they can either do R4, R5, R6, NP8, NP10, or NP15, and that's it, if they're going to rezone. So anyone coming in for rezoning, these are their options. And then there's guidance for the density of projects as well. So in a yellow low density residential area, the densities would typically range from 3 to 12 dwelling units per acre. And that's consistent with single family residential projects. So that's kind of how all of this works. So for each of the for each of the land use categories, there is a description of how development should look in that area. There's a list of the allowed zoning districts, a description of the relative density, the range of density you should find in that area, and then any other exceptions or clauses. So for every land use category, there's going to be a definition like this. Did everybody get those cards? I think you got them as PDFs that shows the land use categories. Is that correct? Okay. You can take some time right now to kind of go through these. We're going to be using those cards to do an activity in a little while. So the general pattern, let's go to the next slide and look at some general patterns. Oh, we're talking about this first. So this is a We Are Here map. So we are at the draft map stage right now. Again, this is not your area. This is actually down around Brooks, south of town. This plan was adopted several years ago, I think, by now. But we're at the draft map stage right now. So you'll be seeing kind of a computer generated first stab at a land use map. And then from that computer generated map, we'll take your feedback and feedback from the community and check all of that back against the plan, vision, and goals always to make sure we're on course. And it's an iterative process, which means we'll be going through multiple planning team meetings before we get to a final map. So this meeting, it was kind of an introduction to land use. We're going to talk about housing, employment, some other stuff at the next meeting. And then planning team meeting number 5, we're again going to talk about the map. And then there's still going to be tweaks after that. So, so there's not like a huge rush to get it fixed today or even fixed within the next couple of months. But this is the trajectory we're going to be moving on for that future land use map, just so you know that. Okay, next slide. And next. So this is your area. So this will be the first time we look at your area. And again, keep those cards handy. We'll be getting into them in a second. I wanted to just kind of briefly show you how the map was constructed. It is a computer generated map, meaning that neither staff nor consultants spend any time looking at, oh, well, this should be purple, or this should be orange, or this should be yellow. We looked at instead previously adopted plans that are in place for your area. As you can tell, there are not many. And then when SA Corridors was done 5 or so years ago, that did give some land use guidance for your area. So we took that into account. And then if there was no previously adopted plan and there was no guidance from SA Corridors, then we relied on current zoning. And the challenge to all of this is that each of these spoke a different language, and we had to translate everything into a common vernacular. So the SA Corridors plan is great, but it didn't use the adopted land use categories that the city put in place because it was done before that. So we had to kind of translate those land use assignments into the vernacular of the newly adopted categories. But when we did that, it ended up looking like this. In the bottom left corner is the SA Corridors land use assignments. And then if there was no SA Corridors, we relied on the current zoning. And obviously there's challenges with that because the zoning map for the city, a lot of areas it was done in the 60s, 70s and 80s. So it is definitely outdated. And even in the newer areas of town like this, your zoning does not reflect any community input. It's not area wide. It's It's usually based on existing uses and patterns. And so it's not always the best place to start for future land use planning. It's like putting the cart before the horse. So your zoning should follow your future land use plan, not vice versa. So, so the preliminary map for your area, needless to say, needs your help. So we didn't get in and add anything to this map that didn't come from either a previous plan or from current zoning, because that is your job and the community's job. So we've got to base this based on vision, goals, and community input. And so this is our base map that we're working off of. And we're hoping from your feedback and what we get at community meetings and other sources, we'll be able to refine this future land use map to more accurately reflect the vision for the future of this area. Next slide. We're just going to go fast through these. As I mentioned, wait, go back. I'm sorry, go back. I mentioned there were no previously adopted plans for your area. I need to clarify, we are not using the sector plans. If any of you were involved in that planning exercise, I think it was like 10 years ago, it's a policy citywide. It's just too complicated. They're too vague and areas are too large and there's not enough refinement. So if you were involved in the sector planning, that is not an input that the city is using to develop its refined future land use plan. And so because of that, there isn't any guidance, planning guidance from previously adopted plans at the neighborhood scale for this area, except for the bottom point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chris, the only exception is the south of 1604. There's a small section right off of Redlands Boulevard that was included within the future land use map for the greater airport plan.
Okay. Yes. Next slide. What happened to our SA corridors slide? Oh, it's the next one. Let's go forward one. Sorry. There we go. Another thing to point out to everyone, because you're gonna have a few months to kind of digest all of this information, and like this presentation will be made available to you. So I want to clear up some things that you may have questions about while we're all together. The way SA corridors was created, it was another computer generated map analysis, and it was analytically based, and it was quantitatively based, and it was, so they developed a model to do some allocations based on some activity assumptions. And so because it was a corridor plan, they took uniform distances off of major corridors to do their assignments. And so if you'll notice, this does not always line up with property boundaries or anything else. It's just a uniform distance from some roadways. And so that obviously presents some challenges for us, because you can't cut a neighborhood right in the middle and then change its land use allocations. They're either the same or they're not. So so we are aware of that. So as you're in here looking at this stuff, I did want to bring that out. Part of Chan's challenge already has been to go in and start looking at that at a preliminary level. But your feedback on that will be much appreciated as well. You'll just notice that big orange, it's like a band and it's a uniform width off the roadways. That's why it's like that. They just calculated a fixed distance from the roadway as a way to determine their corridors. Okay, let's go back a slide.
Carissa, really quick, sorry to interrupt. Yes. Art, before we get to zoning, Art mentioned in the chat, his question was, wasn't the Stone Oak master plan used? Oh, and I see Channer just responded. I just wanted to vocalize.
Oh, yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to mention, because during our last planning team meeting, which Art, I know you were not present, but we had some feedback. I can't remember which planning team member mentioned it, but in previous conversations, we've talked about the Stone Oak master plan. I have that, and it identifies zoning use types. And so we have that, and that'll go into our review of the future land use plan.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I moved my chat box to the other screen while I was presenting. So thank you for doing that. And I'll have to say, so y'all, so my dad lives in Encino Park. I grew up in this area and I live up in Bulverde now. So I feel like we're in my hood for this section. but I'll tell you, and one of the things that our group talked about early on, there are, some of these focus areas are going to have this challenge, is there are restrictive covenants in place in a lot of these areas, and then they're not adopted plans, but they are master plans, because some of the earliest master plan communities in the city, you know, in recent history are in this area. So we are aware of that, and I don't know, Chan's going to work with you on coordinating on how much of that is appropriate to bring in and how much not, how much you want that to drive this and how much you don't. So let's just keep talking about that and share with her what needs to be in here, because those just determine a lot. These blue areas are blue because they are either master plan community developments or they're planned unit developments. So their zoning is not conventional of red, yellow, blue, you know, that kind of thing. So, so that's why there's big turquoise spots in here. But thank you for bringing up that question about the master planning on the private side. It's not public, the city didn't do it, but it's a private master plan community. So those will be taken into account as well. Should we go on? Everyone ready? Okay. As far as zoning goes, as you can tell, it is a pretty binary approach. Yes, I hear someone. No. It's a pretty binary approach to use assignments. It's either residential or commercial. So, which is not bad. It's just, that's not super consistent with the way sites are actually being developed. Like if you look at the Legacy Shopping Center at the northeast corner of 281-1604, I mean, that once the demand was there, they're moving multifamily in now. So it's like, it's slowly becoming a mixed use area. So I think our conversations need to be about that type of stuff. Like, are there places we want to see more integration? We will want to see mixed use. Are there places we can add value or control the way things get built by changing to some of these newer assignments? So it would be great to see more purple and more turquoise and more green where appropriate in this area. So as we're having these conversations, those are some things to look at. Okay, next, let's skip 2 ahead. There we go. So right now, automatically, you see this is already starting to look a little bit better. If we went just off zoning, there's a lot of gaps. But when we bring in those other layers, it gives us a little bit more diversity. So that's like our first check step that we're moving in the right direction. You'll notice that the quarry is showing up as pink for heavy industry, obviously. That other piece is showing up as mixed use for now. One thing I wanted to point out is that these focus areas, because they're single owner parcels, Chan's doing her best to reach out to owners for those areas to get their participation in that. But as you all know, you're more limited on what you can change and control when you're looking at somebody's individual property than you are at, say, an intersection where you're looking at public works and you're looking at like the Via Station area and things like that, where there is a more defined public interest to be served. But where there's not a super defined public interest to be served, your impact or influence on what happens on that site is just a little lower. But you can see there is a little bit more mixed use throughout this area on the composite map that we have right now, but we still have key intersections that are showing up red. So part of our discussion will be, you know, is that appropriate or is that not? So let's look at the next slide. So now we're going to just do a quick fly through of the categories themselves. After we do this, I'm going to move us through this fairly quickly. There's going to be some activities. So as I said, keep those cards out handy. If you have them on your screen, if they're PDF, I'd kind of toggle everything so you can get back and forth. So this is kind of, I'm going to be talking you through some stuff, but it's your chance to get kind of organized on your end as well. Okay, next slide. The land use categories, you can kind of think about them being put in bins, where we've got residential, commercial, mixed use, industrial, and civic. And then within each of those bins, they're organized according to intensity of use, which we call density, of course. So residential is a very clean example of that, where residential estate would be very low density, and then you have low density residential, and then urban low density residential is like duplexes, super small lot, garden homes, patio homes, maybe some townhomes in there. And then medium density residential would be garden apartments or more high density townhome development. And then high density residential is like multi-story apartments. And you'll find that same trend moves through each of these bins, each of these groupings. So commercial, same thing. You go, except for they got flipped on here. So neighborhood commercial is the lowest density, and that's emphasizing neighborhood services. So in San Antonio, when they're talking about neighborhood commercial, it's about neighborhood services. Corner store markets, things like that, things that are compatible with your neighborhood, so they wouldn't generate a disruptive level of traffic or noise. And then community commercial would be along your kind of your collector streets. It would include smaller shopping areas, but things that support your community. And then regional commercial is commercial activity that supports the region. So as that 281-1604 intersection, that's regional scale commercial because it supports the entire region. And then mixed use is a little bit different because we've got some different expressions of mixed use in there. Mixed use traditionally means residential and commercial uses in the same project area. It can be horizontal or vertical. And that can happen at different scales. So neighborhood mixed use would be a residential and non-residential combination that is not disruptive to neighborhoods. And so it could be like in the old days, you know, you'd have a shop with an apartment above it, and the owner of, say, the butcher shop would live above. So that's something that's not disruptive to the residential pattern of neighborhoods. So that would be neighborhood mixed use. Or if you've got a dental office and let's say there's a residence behind, or vice versa, where you have a residence in front and then you have an office behind on the same lot. Urban mixed use is going to be along your collectors. It'll incorporate a little higher density residential and with some retail traffic. And then regional mixed use, of course, is kind of like the Pearl, you know, where you have multi-story apartments and you have a regional scale retail area. So those are going to be mixed use expressions that deal with scale. The top two on there, employment flex and business innovation, these are new for the city of San Antonio, and they are geared more towards industrial and employment oriented mixed use than they are around retail. So if you think neighborhood, urban, and regional mixed use are about like retail and office combined with residential, employment flex was designed to accommodate sites in the cities where adaptive reuse of older industry or warehouse properties or tech flex might need to be transitioned or adapted for redevelopment. And so they're going to be smaller lots. Art spaces can go in there, any type of industrial arts, some small scale craft industries, like whether it's a craft brewery or whatever, that would be fit in with that. And then business innovation mixed use is campus scale. So some of this is found like in the medical center where you have labs and R&D type projects where buffers, security, that type of thing is an issue. So it's not for heavy industry. It's not for heavy industry. It's for clean indoor uses, but laboratory and research and development facilities would fall into that category. And where there's a mixture of uses on the same site. So that would be that. And then for industrial, agriculture is actually a type of industry. So agricultural, light industrial, and heavy industrial would all fall within the industrial bin. And then civic, I just want to mention really quickly, when we're talking about government properties, it means government owned properties. So if you're wondering why something is colored blue for city, state, federal government, it means that the property is owned, it's a government-owned property. And that's just because the zoning and controls of those are different by state law. So those are designated differently. And then parks and open spaces is a category as well. So those are kind of the bins of what we're going through. Let's look at the next slide. I'm going to go through these next ones really fast. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. Anyone, did I hear a comment from someone?
Oh, that was me, Chris. I was just wondering if you wanted me to skip these since you already touched on all the.
Yes, thank you. Let's stay here just a second because I want to explain the crayons real quick. Okay, so as you'll notice, there's crayons over here, and they're going to be what we use in the activity to follow. But every crayon is color-coded because land use is color-coded. So when you see a light yellow, that means residential estate. Where you see the dark yellow, it means low-density residential. So you'll kind of notice that going through. So as you're getting oriented towards these categories, the colors really help to do that. Okay. And I think that's going to tee us up, Ellie, for you at this point. So Ellie's going to, we're going to do kind of a little more of an exercise now to get some of your feedback on these areas. But thank you so much. And let me know if you'll have any questions.
May I talk again about the Stone Oak land use plan?
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about this last meeting. I just want to make sure, and Art brought it up again, the Stone Oak land use plan is not a planning document. The Stone Oak land use plan is a zoning document. The POA is not a city, so we don't use the term zoning. But the Stone Oak land use plan is the designation that a property owner works with. If it's zoned low density residential, that property owner has to build low density residential. The Stone Oak land use plan takes precedence over the city zoning. If someone wants to change one of the designations, they have to get approval from Stone Oak before they can go to the city. The city won't deal with the zoning change unless Stone Oak agrees. And the Stone Oak Board of Directors has never agreed to change any land use that would increase density. So in the 30 years that this land use plan has been around, there's never been a change from low density apartments to high density apartments. There have been changes if it's zoned apartments and somebody wants to build single family, then the Stone Oak Board will easily make that change. And the Stone Oak Board cannot make a land use change without a supermajority, so it takes 8 out of the 10 board members to make a change. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that the Stone Oak Master Plan is a serious document that the property owners have to adhere to, and the land use is the property. It can be sold multiple times, and the land use goes with the property when it's sold. So I'm not sure exactly how we work that into our land use plan here, but we don't need to contradict the land use designations in the Stone Oak Master Plan. I think that's probably my point. So.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And in looking at the Stone Oak Master Plan, and it does identify land use designations that show single family, multifamily, and such, particularly for the properties, surrounding Stone Oak Parkway. And what Carissa was showing, when you look at the composite preliminary future land use map, it was based on those layers that Carissa was talking about, one of which was SA corridors. And so when you see some of the areas adjacent to Stone Oak Parkway, you'll see that the density is higher, but that's not to say that we're right now looking to change it to that higher density per se. It's a reflection of what was pulled off of SA corridors and how that then created this composite future land use map based off of those existing layers that Carissa had mentioned. And so that's why when you look at the densities for the areas immediately adjacent off Stone Oak Parkway, it's a higher density than those properties further away. Hopefully that answers your question or your comment.
Well, I think, I don't want to take up any more time, but I mean, part of the Stone Oak Master Plan includes apartment complexes, for example, that are on Hardy Oak or on Huebner Boulevard or on Canyon Golf, you know, way off of the Stone Oak Parkway. And so all of that is a part of the land use plan. But I think you're going to work it in. We'll make sure it works. Again, not to repeat it, I just did not want us to come up and say, well, we can decide land that's within the Stone Oak POA, how we want to assign a land use category to it. And we have to assign the same land use category that the Stone Oak land use plan has. We can't change that.
So Joe, there's that's what the point I made at the beginning, where any of the master plan community developments or any PUDs that are in place are going to trump all this stuff. So we're not talking about zoning at all right now. So your entitlements are what they are, and there are other restrictive covenants in place in this area as well. And so that's why this is the first stab at this map. And so we aren't going to be how to say this. We're not going to have the zoning drive this process, but at the same time, we're not going to create conflict. And so we will work with those boundaries in those areas, and we're going to refine the map to reflect everything you just said for that bound area. And like I said, I think there's restrictive covenants on the other side of the road that would influence what can and can't be done as well. So we know that. So part of the refinement process will be making sure this map reflects that.
Okay, well, I think we're probably in agreement. Again, all I was saying was that the Stone Oak Master Plan, if we were a city, we would call it our zoning, but we're not a city, so we came up with the term land use plan. But it's not a general document. It's a specific property by property, parcel by parcel designation of what a property owner can do with that parcel. And city can't change that, so it's a plan, and that was part of the annexation of Stone Oak. The city agreed to this in the mid '80s, you know, during annexation, which may not be the same for all other planned unit developments around that. You know, I don't know. All I'm familiar with is the Stone Oak one. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Joe. So we are going to include all of those comments that you're making in our mural board and have that incorporated in the feedback and report out that we give you all at the end of this meeting. And so keeping all of that at the front of mind, Ellie's going to kick us off in discussion on the mural board and really start to get us more familiar with these land use categories that Carissa just presented.
All right. Thanks, Kristen and Carissa and Channery. Yeah, so now we're going to move into like a more interactive portion of our meeting. I think you all have a copy of these cards. I've got mine here in front of me. So what we're going to do is go through a few different questions, and then we're going to look at the map and get your feedback within each of the focus areas that Channery mentioned before. So just to get ourselves a little more familiar with the palette of land uses that we have, our first question for you is within this area, what land use do you live, work, or spend most of your time in? So whether you're a local resident, maybe you also work in the area, we're asking everyone to select one of our 18 land uses that you spend most of your time in within Stone Oak. For you to communicate what that is, if your cards are cut out, or you can hold it up in front of the screen. If you have your camera on, it would be great for you to hold it up. Alternatively, you can put it into the chat, and then we're going to be kind of pulling these crayons down from our digital mural whiteboard here to kind of see where do people have the most experience in Stone Oak at the moment within these land use categories? So again, if you have your camera on, you want to hold one up, or if you want to put one in the chat, I'll start to vocalize those. And Kristen and Saul are working in our whiteboard behind the scenes.
And everybody should do like one-ish, right? Like just the one main one that represents, like as a representative on this planning team committee, is it based on where you live or is it based on where you work?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, one would be great, just since there's several of us. All right, I see Kelsey has regional commercial. Great, thank you. Anybody else? Low density residential, Art said in the chat. Great. Anybody else with your camera on have a card?
I see Vicky holding one up.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. Residential estate, I think, our lightest yellow, lowest density residential land use. I see parks and open space, Annalisa put in the chat. Great. CC, I think that's community commercial, Angie said. Full variety so far. No repeats yet. Anybody else want to chime in with theirs? All right. Great. Well, let's keep moving. So that's just a good exercise to kind of start thinking about how these land uses apply to you and your experience in Stone Oak. Our next question, we want to kind of sort through all these crayons or these different land uses that are color coded. So our question is, which of these land uses do you want to see more of in general in the Stone Oak area? And then which of these aren't appropriate or do we not need more of in Stone Oak? So we're going to go through and sort these crayons to the left or the right here. And then what we're going to do is use the land uses you'd like to see more of to do some actual coloring on the map. So if anyone has thoughts on what land uses they might want to see more of or don't want to see more of in Stone Oak, feel free to unmute and speak up, or you can put it in the chat, or you can hold up your card or raise your hand and I will call on you. We'll leave it open for a minute then. All right, Kelsey, I see you have, is that urban mixed use? Do you want to speak to what you envision with that one a little bit?
The description of that one just seems like it kind of matches what we were talking about with including places for people to live and work, having some institutional uses too nearby.
Great. Yeah, thanks. So you want to see more of that, it sounds like, in Stone Oak. Cool. Yeah, urban mixed uses are medium density mixed use. So there's neighborhood, urban, and regional, just as a reminder. I see Annalisa put in the chat, parks and open space. Yeah, I think that's come up in prior planning team meetings with this group. Do you want to say anything else about that, Annalisa? Not sure if you can unmute. All right, we'll go ahead and put that over in the left column. Art, you said no industrial. Is that both heavy and light industrial are two density categories there?
Yes, in my opinion, both categories.
And do you want to speak a little bit to why you feel that way?
Again, I to follow up what Joe has said, for the majority of the area that is in that this plan is Stone Oak POA, and Stone Oak POA does not have industrial categories.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, I see you have your hand up.
A quick question about the parks and green spaces and open spaces. Other cities I've lived in have maintained certain ratios for population and then amount of either open space or green space, especially parks. And so I was wondering if San Antonio had anything like that. Because it seems like, at least to me, the Stone Oak area is not meeting that ratio from other places I've lived in, like Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they do, Jeff, this is Carissa again, but San Antonio's, their park master plan will do a level of service, and San Antonio's is pretty low. So yes, they have one, but it's lower than what you would expect. So it's just because the city's so big, you know, and so there isn't a different level of service for different parts of town. It's citywide, and it is pretty low.
Yeah, and there are also industry standards or park standards for what it's called level of service, basically, the access to parks in different neighborhoods. So those are always helpful to cross-check as well. And then I see Rich and Andrew both put regional mixed use in the chat. Do either of you want to speak up to clarify if you want more of that? Or actually, there is none in on the current map. So I'm guessing you want to see more of it, but either of you want to speak to your thoughts on regional mixed use? Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, well, I came from, I live in Stone Oak now, but came from the Pearl, lived in the Pearl for a few years before that. So, I think I've said on a couple of the previous ones that it just would be nice to have an area where you can kind of set up shop for the day and get to a lot of different places without driving around a lot of different spots. So that's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mixed use is the type of place where you can, maybe you live there, maybe you work there, both. Maybe we say live, work, and play. So you play there, you shop there, there's entertainment. And then it tends to be, especially regional mixed use is dense enough that it does tend to be a much more walkable environment than commercial. Yeah. Andrew, did you unmute as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of wanted to clarify. I think this use needs to be site specific, and I was specifically thinking of 1604 and 281, that southwest corner where you've got a vacant IHOP, and a couple of other retailers in that area are just having a hard time because of obviously the flyover and the way the new highway system has affected retail in that area. It seems like a pretty good candidate for some type of use like that, where maybe access isn't as important to success.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the existing infrastructure is there, and you're doing a good segue, which we'll do in just a minute, Andrew, but we are going to go scroll over and look at the map, and we can talk about specific locations. So we'll make a note of that, and then we can get that on the map in our next portion here. Annalisa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, because with the zoning designations are tied to impervious cover limits. So we have different impervious cover limits, say for residential, for commercial, and like that. It's always been our position, and we had a long-standing policy with the city that we did not object to changes in land use unless it was a drastic change, like a business that might use hazardous materials or something, as long as the impervious cover limits stayed with the previous land use. And that is still our position. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Great.
And Elisa, really quickly, this came up in another meeting, so to clarify for everyone as well. So we talked about that land use and zoning are different, but one thing to emphasize, because I think it's germane to your point, is that any overlays that are in place for certain areas, we have military overlays, we have exographed recharge zones, anything like that that is an overlay for an area, those standards do not get changed or touched by this. Like down around the missions, there's view shed requirements. So this is completely separate from that. So even if we went in and showed something as like regional mixed use on this map, they would still have to comply with any of those requirements that are in place. And so some of those areas might not be built. It's like if a creekway runs through an area, just because it's showed zones that you can't build on top of the creek. So those restrictions don't get impacted by this land use plan at all. Those overlays are still going to be in place.
They actually do, just because we have, you know, a graded system where the amount of impervious cover is tied to the land use. So it actually can increase from
I see what you're saying.
30% to 85%, you know.
Yes. Okay. In that way, yes. So maybe when we're going through this map, if you can kind of be the watchdog for that and keep checking that for us, because you're going to know those numbers better than anyone else on the team.
Okay. Thank you.
You know what I mean? We're gonna try our best to respect that, but you're going to have the strongest knowledge base in that. So help remind us as we're going through this if there's going to be cause for concern.
Thanks.
Oops.
And Ellie, I wanted to highlight that Robert asked the question. He asked, what land does medical fit into?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of depends what type of medical. So a large medical campus, like maybe a hospital, I think would most likely fit into our dark teal color, which is this business innovation mixed use. That's the one that has some larger footprint buildings, more of a campus setting. But then smaller medical uses, so maybe a pharmacy or a smaller clinic, those could really happen in several different land uses. They could happen within mixed use of any scale. They could also happen within commercial of any scale. So it just depends what scale and development pattern of medical you're thinking of.
And it's right, we've been treating it traditionally, we've been treating them as commercial. Any of those institutional uses like trade school or hospital or any type of healthcare, they would go with whatever the surrounding commercial uses are for the area. So that's why it could include in a lot. It is not, we don't have a category for civic per se. So those uses like schools and hospitals, they're going to be whatever is around them. So whatever the land use is that's contextually appropriate is kind of how they'll be determined.
All right. I just want to touch on maybe some residential uses as well. We haven't talked about those much. Does anyone have thoughts on what densities, land uses of residential you might like to see more of or not see more of in Stone Oak? So again, we've got high density, medium density, urban low, low, and residential estate. So that's from highest to lowest density. Oh, Minnie, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to talk a little bit about the residential, especially on that number 5 area that is that Yates area. There's a lot of it that's empty right now. It also includes, I don't know if that includes the house, the actual Yates house, and then the ranch, little ranch, Trevino Ranch, that is right next to it, that I guess eventually will all be developed. I'd like to see that we keep some of that as a green space or park space or something because of the creeks that run through it, and supposedly there's caves underneath. And so I'd like for there to be some careful research that goes into that whole area there, and how any green space, how that would impact future residential areas that are built there. I think that's like super important, especially for the area there. We know that I don't think it's the Mud Creek. I think it's Elm. I don't know. There's another creek that runs there, and when it rains really hard, we can hear it. It comes through Emerald Forest and then joins another creek, and so we know that. Anyway, it's an important area. All of that.
Yeah.
And it's not just the Yates parcel that's been sold, it's their house and the area, the Trevino area next door.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you, Minnie. It's helpful. Annalisa, I see you have your hand raised. I'm not sure if that's still up from before, if you had another comment.
It's still up from before, but I do want to register that I totally agree with this previous comment.
Great, yeah, thank you. All right. I'll do one more last call for any other land uses people would like to see more of. Again, this is not really your last chance, but we'll move over to the map after this.
I just have one other little thing before we start the map. You'll see one of the things that will come up in our other conversations is maybe there probably aren't many uses that shouldn't be anywhere. It's more about where. So if we're supposed to be increasing, housing, there's going to be some places where high density is appropriate and somewhere it isn't, and we recognize that. So this is like sweeping general, but as you get into the map, we've got to figure out, okay, so where can that density be located? Where can those uses go in our area, and get more spatial about it?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Krista. All right. I'm not hearing anything else. So let's go ahead and move over to the map. All right, so the way we have this set up, we've got the current draft land use map that Carissa mentioned is computer generated. So we've got these potential focus areas outlined on the map, and I'll zoom in. We're thinking we will go through those one at a time and then ask what you guys might like to see in those areas, what land uses might be appropriate in the future, knowing that we're trying to accommodate growth, both employment and residential, trying to just understand which of these focus areas might be best suited for that growth and how would you like to see it look. So you can refer to your copy of the land use cards. And then just a reminder, it sounded like mixed use and parks and open space were our biggest priorities from the comments that we just heard. All right, so let me zoom in. I'm a little bit blurry on my screen for some reason. There we go. All right, so our first focus area, number 1, and this one is up a bit north here on the sort of leg of Stone Oak, up on Highway 281. Right now, the map is showing a mix of community commercial, regional commercial, and I believe medium density residential along the back here. So my question is, are there any other land uses that the group feels might be appropriate here in the future, especially looking at those mixed use categories, parks and open space, and other more dense categories to help accommodate some of that projected growth? And we'll go ahead and we can color on the map to capture your feedback. And if anyone wants to unmute or put their thoughts in the chat for this specific area, please do.
And just to remind everyone, focus area number 1, this area was the portion that included property owners for Santikos, HEB, and I think there was a Jaffin LLC.
Awesome. Thanks, Channery. Carissa said, this site is north of Bulverde Road on the east side of 281. Yeah, I believe that is correct. We're up here on the far north end of our focus area. Anybody have thoughts up here? Maybe mixed use along the corridor? It looks like, it's mostly commercial now, not as much residential. So there could be an opportunity to add some density along the major corridor, add some residential uses. Robert, did you unmute?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see what's the size of that. I mean, what's the depth and width, and because I look at it and see commercial lots or commercial pads, but if it's a lot bigger than that, then do you have any idea of the depth or acreage? There was a scale in the map, I know, but
yeah. So there's the version with the aerial, which gives you some scale. It's a little tough when we're zoomed this far in, but you can kind of see some building footprints over here. It is a significant area, largely undeveloped, it looks like. Pretty good size. I don't have a acreage off the top of my head.
And is that the one that had a plan for mixed use already, or am I jamming?
No, this one, I believe this area is just based on existing zoning is what we're seeing on the map. Sorry, I'm scrolling back and forth here. So it's got the red colors just for commercial. It's not showing any mixed use at the moment, but we could talk about mixed use, adding mixed use there, if that's something that you're proposing, if you're interested in.
It might be that it's so far from most of us that we don't really know anything about it too.
Well, I'll tell y'all that there's a lot of amenities to connect in with that Bulverde Road 281 intersection, because the distillery, the Rebecca Creek Distillery, is at the southwest corner, and they're very parking challenged. But you also have some topography and drainage way challenges there as well. But that intersection is all new development right now, with the exception of the old stuff at the northeast corner. So there's opportunity along there, and then there's a neighborhood right behind it. Trinity, is it Trinity Oaks, Trinity Forest? I forget, Chan, what the name is. But it's an L-shaped entrance. There's two entrances. There's an entrance in the neighborhood off of Bulverde to the south, and then the white road in the middle of this area is their entrance off of 281. So it directly abuts a single-family residential neighborhood right where the number 1 is. So this is going to be an area of commercial activity that lies between 281 and a neighborhood, kind of like how Encino Park is.
Yeah.
And you're right, Chris, it's Trinity Oak.
Okay.
I see Kelsey put regional mixed use in the chat. Kelsey, do you want to speak up at all what you're thinking with that? Or are you thinking potentially the whole focus area could be good for regional mixed use? No, maybe you're not able to.
And Ellie, while Kelsey is unmuting, I just wanted to go ahead and let Robert know that it's approximately about 1,000 feet from the 281 frontage to the back end to the neighborhood, just to give you some perspective on those northern longer rectangular parcels.
Okay, and a typical, pad site will be, it's usually about 400 feet deep. So, it might be as narrow as 300. So it's more than what you would see as like a typical, pad site. So yeah, definitely deeper than that.
Right, and as you said, there's commercial frontage, but then on this back end, it does have that medium density designation included in there. So I know
that orange is more like multifamily or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I know Kelsey mentioned regional mixed use. And so that could be something that obviously there are, with the composite that Carissa already created, that's something that's already being generated based on the designations, the zoning already on the ground. So regional mixed use could include what's permitted to this day, and obviously give them some more potential opportunities in the future for growth.
One thing to think about, guys, remember the land use plan is about transitions and relationships. So you kind of want to think too about what do you want right next to houses? Because those are backyards that orange is butting up against, which is why the zoning map shows it as higher density residential right now, because whatever assignment happens in the focus area, just remembering that it's right up next to low density residential single family neighborhood. Those transitions, are going to be important, and the access as well. So finding a category that would transition well to single family neighborhoods, but that would also maximize your opportunities associated with 281 is going to be the trick along some of these corridor stretches.
Yeah, so maybe for now, I'm hearing regional mixed use, and Carissa just made a great point about, they're abutting the single family. So maybe we do sort of a urban mixed use, regional mixed use combo, and we could just hatch it for now and kind of dive in a little deeper as we move forward with the planning effort.
Yeah, is there going to be a deeper dive where you say, oh yeah, against this corridor, we want to protect these houses, that sort of thing, or is it just going to be, oh, number one is this land use?
Yeah, we will get to a deeper dive for sure. Ultimately, land use is going to be mapped at the parcel level, so there might be some variation within the focus areas. It doesn't need to be all one land use across the focus area.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to keep this moving for the sake of time so we can get through. I think we have 12 of those. All right, so number 2, this one is the Overlook Parkway focus area. So here we've got some regional commercial on the south side and urban mixed use, that middle ground mixed use on the north side. Chandra, do you want to give a little bit of a reminder about where this is or the property owners on this one as well?
Yes, so the property owners for this, excuse me, the San Antonio Housing Trust Public Facility Corporation. I can't recall which portion they own. I'm guessing it's the portion that is in purple, and then Bitter Blue, which is a developer, and they usually do master plan communities as well, and then HEB.
Anybody have thoughts?
And to give some context, directly across from Overlook, the purple on the east side is all being, I think it's commercially developed right now. I think they're just doing the land development. There's no, I don't think, Chan, correct me if I'm wrong, but just east where that cursor is there's new stuff moving in right there right now. So, and then there on the north side of Overlook, there's the Baptist emergency room, I believe, and Caliber Collision, all that kind of stuff. So there is already some civic and then new development happening at that intersection.
Yeah, it's a great point. So it sounds like there's some momentum here already. It maybe could develop sooner rather than later across the street from that other new development. So, and it, you know, we do have some mixed use maps here already. Does anybody have thoughts on maybe this darker red regional commercial? Would you like to see that be anything different long term? Maybe add any residential or mixed use?
Hey, Ellie, can I ask a question real fast?
What is the street right there?
The street right there? Let's see. I don't have it labeled on here. Maybe Kristen or Chandra.
Overlook Parkway is on the north white street there, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And this is the area that surrounds, there's like a substation just south of Overlook. And it's the portion that's in red, just south of Overlook.
Oh, this one.
Yes, that's a substation there.
Maybe, Ellie, what we need to talk about is whether there needs to be any changes to these colors. Instead of just opening it up to what do you think this should be, maybe it's, is there a problem with how this looks now and what do we need to explore to make it better? Because I think some of the points that have been raised are good points, but it's kind of hard to say without some, you know, just randomly picking a point on the map and saying, what color do you want this to be? So maybe we look at, if we leave this as it is now, is that going to cause any problems, or is there something that would make it better? Because we're trying, guys, just so you all know, these focus areas, we want to find, there are places where future and investment will go. That's public investment and public improvements, bond projects, things like that. Where can streetscaping enhancements give us benefit? Are there trail connections that need to go here? Those types of questions. So, so as we look in these areas, is the way it's colored now, which is mixed use and regional commercial, is that going to capture everything that's probably going to want to be attracted to this area, or do we need to make any changes?
Yeah, and according to the tax records, the two reds are owned by HEB. The two large red parcels there. Yes, thank you.
And one thing to consider as well, as Chris has said, you know, looking at what do we want to see there, but also what's not working. But also maybe if you think that these designations fit this area, I mean, let us know as well, because there are other focus areas to look at, maybe to discuss further, and also maybe this starts to identify that these designations are already in place, just based on what's approved to date. And as we get through conversations and things progress, I know Chris just gave a detailed description on what our focus areas will look like and how they'll be developed. Potentially, you know, as we develop within this plan, all the 12 focus areas presented today, all of those might not be focus areas in the end. So just to let you know that, you know, our conversations today and coming up in other planning team meetings, we're really determined, okay, maybe this isn't the vision we wanted to have for this focus area, or maybe we like the direction it's already going and it doesn't need to be planned out anymore. So that just gives you some background. So, even though we're looking at these today based on our discussion from the last planning team meeting, you might decide, again, focus area 2, we agree, we think this looks good, and then we can move forward to the next one.
Thanks, Kristen. All right, not hearing any comments on this one, I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving south. So now we're here at number 3, so at Stone Oak Parkway and Highway 281. So here we've got some purple, which is that urban mixed use again. So they're already kind of capturing some of our mixed use goals. And the dark orange here is high density residential. So does anyone have any issues with the way that's mapped? Want to see anything different? It is a mixed use and high density already, so it is a potential area to capture some more growth in theory.
And this is where the VIA station is located, on this corner.
Right, thank you.
Would there be any reason to give community commercial a thought here?
We could. What makes you interested in community commercial here? Just to see some retail uses, or?
Well, yeah, and the VIA land there, it seems like there's a lot. I just don't know if that area really demands that type of density.
Yeah. So when we do have a transit station like that, especially a regional transit station, we really like to pursue a development pattern called transit-oriented development. So it's a sustainable form of development. So we often try to get as many people within close proximity to the transit to make best use of that transit investment, as well as to make it more of a destination place. So people can ride transit to get there rather than having to drive. So that is the type of place where we usually want to see some additional density focused. So the mixed use designation would allow for those retail uses while also providing people in the area at other times of day. If retail is mostly used maybe like evenings and weekends, if you have office and you have people living there, it really makes it more of a vibrant area while still allowing for those retail uses to happen and make it more of a destination.
Okay, just to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So it wouldn't preclude, say, a coffee group with a drive-through.
No.
No.
And Andrew, another thing about the mixed use areas, it actually gives a higher level of flexibility. So if you just designate those areas as community commercial, you can't do any multifamily. But if they're designated as mixed use, you can choose whether you're going to or not. So you at least present the option there. And I was actually, and again, getting back to relationships, it seems like that multifamily would be better served being wrapped into make that whole area purple. So, and it's because of that, your MUs are going to give you more flexibility on what you can use your property for.
And
as long as it doesn't preclude it, then I think that makes sense. If it's just a bigger umbrella, then yeah. Yeah,
you're right. A bigger umbrella. That's a really good way to describe it. And just to give you some more context to VIA on an advanced rapid transit line. So it really at this point ends at the airport area and goes all the way down to Steve's Avenue. So kind of runs through the spine of the city through San Pedro and then cutting through downtown and St. Mary's and Roosevelt Avenue. So that's the area that's funded to date. However, when they receive additional funding, they're looking at an extension of that line all the way to the Stone Oak Park and Ride. And so it is going to be a big player in their northern connectivity for that advanced rapid transit line that they're currently working on and designing.
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. And I see Robert put in the chat, the purple in number 2 is affordable multifamily, 264 units supposedly under construction. Great. So yeah, having that mixed use designation there just means that other uses can be mixed in to serve people that would be living there. All right, keep moving. So now let's move down. We're just here south of Evans Road in number 4. So 281 Evans Road, we're on the southeast corner there. So this one is pretty much all commercial uses as currently mapped. So that would preclude residential in this area. It's primarily this dark red, which is regional commercial. Community commercial is this sort of pink rose color. And I believe this one is our neighborhood commercial in the middle. So a little bit of a patchworky pattern here, potentially an opportunity to make that more of a cohesive place. Maybe add some more different uses. Anybody have thoughts on this one or issues with the way it's developed currently, or what you'd like to see there in the future?
And to remind everyone, this is the location that has the Home Depot there, Discount Tire. There's a post office there. It's interesting, it didn't show up as state government designation, but the post office is within this area on the southeasterly portion.
This is another one where we're abutting up against low density residential in the yellow. So another place where we can consider potentially transitioning in density and use and or use to the surrounding neighborhood. We're also along this major roadway of 281. So, you know, that tends to be a place where maybe higher density might be appropriate as well to build off that existing infrastructure. Any thoughts on this one? If not, we'll keep moving.
And to give some context, so the neighborhood behind it is the village at Encino Park. And then you also have just the Encino Park community as well. So just those 2-3 neighborhoods are part of the Encino Park area that are just right to the east of this focus area.
All right, maybe we're waiting for some later focus areas to put our mixed use that were identified as priorities before, but we can always circle back to these. All right, so number 5, this is that the Yates property. Right now it's showing as this medium purple, which is the urban mixed use. There's also a bit of low density residential here on the western edge. And we're here on Bulverde Road. There's also a little bit of, I think that's medium or high density residential up here, just a little spot up on the north side. And I know this one was mentioned earlier. Oh yeah, Minnie said earlier in the chat, parks and green space and future development in number 5. So we can color some green on the map. I do think it is one large or maybe 2 large parcels. So we can only do one land use per parcel, but something like a mixed use environment does have some more inclusion for parks and open space often than something like just commercial.
And didn't this space used to be agricultural? I have an old map that said it was agricultural, which threw me off, but it just seems like, I think Minnie's right on this one. We need to find some green space here.
Looks like Annalisa is agreeing as well. And also residential estate.
So guys, one of the things on the land use plan, the future land use plan is not just the map. There's, because, you know, we say it's a policy document. So there's always text that accompanies the map in the form of recommendations and description of how things need to play out. So in the write-up of the plan, sites like this, like we can't go in and plan someone's site, but we can write in what you're talking about. So there needs like general patterns of how we want to see trail connectivity and to parkland and things like that. So as we're looking at the land use map and we're talking about these things, if there's something that maybe it's not a specific color you want to see on a map, but it's a principle or a policy you'd like to see applied, that's appropriate in these conversations as well.
And is there a way to see their MPCD, Carissa?
That's a Channery question.
I have their MPCD. There's not much to it. It just designates, you know, along the creek there, or excuse me, off of Bulverde Road, east of the creek, it shows it as MF for multifamily. And then to the west of the creek, it shows it as SF single family. So it's almost like a MPCD that's a placeholder for now, and there's no associated site plan with it yet.
Right,
So-
but they don't have any commercial zoning in the MPCD or anything like that. So it
No, but that's not to say that we're going to preclude any of those uses. I have a separate meeting with the representative for the property owner to talk about this. So I'd be happy to report to them some of the input that we received during this meeting.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, Boulevardy Road is a pretty busy road these days, so.
A raceway.
Yeah, but if you look up and down Boulevardy Road, there's more residential than anything else. I don't see a lot of commercial.
Jan, where's the Circle K facility? I know it's outside of our planning area because it's east, but just knowing what's around this area, where the Circle K facility is, and then also the other multifamily developments. You know how close this is to any of that? Just because continuity and grouping this stuff is helpful. You know,
Across the street. It's across the street from this.
Right where the road kind of has a S curve to it, or reverse S curve. That's right there is the Circle K one.
Oh yeah, I can
Right.
see the plate underneath. Okay. Yeah.
All right, and I saw Kelsey wrote, or Jeff wrote trails, and Kelsey wrote civic, park, green space, public use. Yeah, so, you know, without it being a publicly owned property, it's probably not something we would really mark the whole parcel as parks and open space, but rather include it in our policies and plan language, as Carissa mentioned. All right. So that was number 5. Let's go down here to number 6. So now we're on the south side of 1604. This area is the Redlands Road focus area. Here we're, right along 1604. We've got primarily community commercial, a little bit of regional commercial in these dark red spots, touching into some parks and open space here in this green color. And then a bit of low density residential, some smaller lots over here, bigger properties sprinkled on the south side, and a little bit of high density residential in this kind of sliver parcel here as well.
Yeah, and just to help orient everyone, this focus area. It includes that existing business called Just Pots, where you drive off Redlands, you turn right, you kind of, it's like a windy road that goes up there, and large parcel of land, but they just have those pots that you could buy. So seems, and based off of the map that Matt had presented last time, it was, I think it popped up as one of the underutilized parcels. And then on the other side of Redland Road, there's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and then south of 1604 there, but east of Redland Road. It's all undeveloped. I think portion of it might be limited based on perhaps floodplain.
Also on the north side, I believe there's a lot of stuff that's being built right now or just recently built. So there is development activity on the north. I don't know if y'all talked about this, about capturing that intersection at all and including anything else, or just the area south of 1604. But I don't know what's in there now, but I know there's just been a lot of construction on that northern edge for a while. And so building off of that, maybe figuring out what that's going to be and making sure we have some continuity at that intersection. I don't know too about, speaking of connectivity, and like along 281, TxDOT's been spending a lot of money to drop sidewalks in and things like that. I don't think 1604's gotten that treatment. So I don't know if that's a demand for that residential area or not, like better connections to that, or if it's just fine to leave it the way it is, because so much of this is undeveloped, but things other than that might need to be talked about too. So I just don't know about that north side.
No, that's a good point, Carissa. Thank you. And on Redlands Road, because the overpass there does have sidewalks and crosswalks there. And then north of 1604, and 1604 does not have the same treatment with the sidewalks and stuff, I think, because it's just so auto-oriented. But north of 1604, that development that you had mentioned, according, it looks like, well, there's multifamily off of Corporate Woods Drive, and then right off of Redland Road, it looks like across from like a little pet boutique, Bourbon Street Seafood and Kitchen. It looks like there's a ice cream shop going in, and a buttermilk sky pie shop. I don't, looks like a food, like an eatery. another restaurant.
Okay.
Channery, since there's a lot of development there right now, maybe this would be a good time to kind of let everyone take, what we've talked about in consideration, and maybe they could provide more input later on so we can move forward to the next focus areas. And I saw Robert provided a comment, so we'll note this in our notes, that, the big parcel in this focus area is about 78 acres. And it includes a lot of almost 17 acres of floodplain, which is quite a bit. So maybe a good use for maybe some, parks and open space opportunities, seeing that it's floodplain.
Yeah.
All right, great. So just a quick time check. We've only got about 8 minutes left. So I think what maybe we should do at this point is open it up. If anyone has thoughts on any of the remaining focus areas, again, there'll be more chances to comment on these, and I want to save a minute or two for some next steps as well. But we ended at number 6. So if anybody has any thoughts on what you're seeing on the map for 7 through 12, I'm just going to go ahead and open up the conversation, and we can zoom into any one of those if anyone has feedback.
And again, to give some direction, so on 7, this is the Martin Marietta site that we talked about last time, and I know Channery had noted that these property owners are obviously not really looking to end their operations anytime soon. However, just seeing that this is an area plan that has about a 20-year vision, just thinking long-term, right? And maybe providing some guidance on what could be there after post, the core use. We have many examples of that in San Antonio already, developments that have occurred. And then we have a lot of corridors, or I guess intersections and corridors that have been identified on Huebner Road, maybe some safety issues, and some potential to have more of, streetscape improvements along this corridor that are needed, as well as number 8 and number 9. And then also that was a big concern for 12 and 11 in general, just kind of the overall development of those. I know earlier Jeff and Channery were talking about the connectivity issues in focus area number 12, and kind of just the confusing layout of it. So keeping all of those things in mind, what are any type of improvements you see we need to make land use wise to those areas? We'll let everyone sit in the awkward silence, get comfy with it. Okay. We can utilize the chat too. Joe, it looked like maybe you were going to unmute, but I won't put you on the spot in case you weren't. We can utilize the chat if you all have comments. And as Channery said, this is not going to be the last time we bring back the focus area map. We're going to go through many iterations and versions of this map based on your input during our land use meetings, but also as we talk about maybe some mobility improvements that are needed in future meetings that might impact what we want to see on this land use map. So just keep all of that in mind, and we, Channery, will be available to also get input from you all individually after this meeting. So this isn't going to be the last time you see this. So I guess we'll kick it back to you for next steps.
I was talking and I was muted, but thank you for that, Kristen. So just to remind everyone, perhaps about a month ago, I had sent out an invite for you to participate. And this is an optional meeting, but we highly encourage you to participate. The SHIP overview, that's our neighborhood housing services department. They are going to provide an overview about their strategic housing implementation plan. And so the timing works perfectly because we're going to, our next planning team meeting, we're going to talk about housing and economic development. So I will send another reminder in another couple of weeks about the SHIP overview meeting. That's in the evening from, I believe, 6 to 7:30. And then after that, we'll be having our next planning team meeting number 4, and that'll be Thursday, September 1st, where we'll talk about land use, but specifically housing and economic development as well. And then after that, we'll have our second community meeting, and we're still working on pinning down the specific day and time and location for that, but more to come on that before that meeting, because before we have the community meeting, we didn't have a great turnout during the first community meeting. So I'm going to also request from the planning team that you also help me spread the word to your different neighborhood associations and other stakeholders and business owners so that we can have a higher attendance at the next meeting. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I'm happy to meet with anyone individually to carry this conversation related to land use further. And then with that, I think we will conclude the meeting. Does anyone have any final comments or questions that you'd like to share with the planning team right now? Okay, I don't see any raise of hands. So with that, thank you so much for your time. We'll send out a meeting summary and PDF, and I'll send out the link for everyone to access that or share it with your community and stakeholders within the next 2 weeks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.